Okay.
Well, welcome everyone to this initial effort to disseminate scientific information from the McGill Office for Science and Society. And we will probably be doing this on a somewhat regular basis, talking about COVID-19, what else is there to talk about, but more as well. Because as time goes on, we will try to get back to the usual scientific questions that emerge. Anyway, let me introduce you to who we have here. Emily Shore is going to be in the background monitoring calls and letting us know what you guys are interested in. And then we have Jonathan Jarry, who is a communicator with our office and has got a background in molecular biology. And Ada McVean, who is also a communicator in our office, and she just graduated in chemistry. And then we also have joining us today Dr. Debbie Schwarcz, who's my daughter, and she's an emergency room physician, and she'll be able to answer the medical questions. So all of us together hopefully can put some sense into a lot of the nonsense that is out there, because that is the theme of our office. We hope to separate sense from nonsense. And in this era of COVID-19, there's more nonsense emerging on a daily basis. Okay, well, let's see what we can do here. And you can, whether you're with us on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you are, you can, of course, ask us questions. So we'll monitor the questions and see what interesting ones we find. Okay, Emily, do we have anything?
No questions yet, but we have someone saying a very nice, enthusiastic hello. But I know you have a lot of questions that you can start us off with.
Okay, there's certainly a lot of stuff that is emerging, and obviously everyone is talking about masks, whether or not the general public should be wearing masks. And originally, the WHO, World Health Organization, and CDC in Atlanta were telling us that there was absolutely no need for the general public to wear masks. Now they seem to be wavering a little bit. So maybe we'll start out with Debbie and get your perspective on what is happening in the hospital with masks.
So right now with masks, it's actually, there's a big controversy over masks. I think we're really not sure what we should be doing. So right now, personally, I have cold symptoms. I did get tested for COVID and it's negative. So I can assure you that when I am returning to work, I will absolutely be wearing a mask, as I think anybody with any kind of viral upper respiratory tract symptoms should be doing. Most important, I think, is the patients to be wearing masks, especially patients that are currently symptomatic with cough, sore throat, runny nose. That's the most important. And I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that patients, when their mouths and their nose are covered, that there's less spread of disease. I think that that's clear. What's more unclear is whether masks are preventing the spread from asymptomatic people. And obviously, as a healthcare worker, we're such great vectors for the transmission.
Of course, the issue that most people out there are interested in is whether or not they should be wearing masks, general public, when they're out for a walk, when they go to the grocery store. I think that there really is no evidence that if you go out for a walk, that masks are of any help, because you need to have significant contact with the virus in the air, whether it's droplets or aerosolized. Walking is, I don't think, a problem. But what about in enclosed environments, like going shopping in a grocery store, which we used to say, well, this is not a problem at all. But we have some information emerging now, especially this study in Japan, where they had this special camera that looks at what happens when you cough and you sneeze. And you have tiny particles that drift further than just the 6 feet and stay in the air. And
Joe, I think we lost you.
Yeah. We can't hear you. Maybe try taking out your phone.
Well, in the meantime, Debbie, do you have any advice for people who are going to the grocery store, to the pharmacy? Should they be wearing masks, homemade masks, or masks that they can buy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think that the big issue with masks is that there's a fear that that there won't be enough for the people that actually do need them. So I think that that's the biggest reason why we're not widely telling everybody that masks are needed. Definitely, the most important thing when you go out is that you are washing your hands and you're practicing good hand hygiene. That is very, very clear. Your hands should be rough and dry right now. They should not be smooth and silky. So I think that that's the most important. Obviously, going to the grocery store is a very quick event. You're in, you're out, you get what you need, and you're not dawdling around. You're staying at home as much as possible. And I think that it's left at this point. I think that the cloth masks there's really not much to them. There's really not much evidence to them. The real risk with masks is that people who are wearing masks are more likely to touch their face as they're adjusting their mask. So there's a real risk of self-contamination. You touch your face to adjust the mask, and then you go and you touch the grocery cart. And so that's the idea behind it, why it's so unclear whether these masks are needed and whether they're helpful. So I think that I know that there are definitely lots of countries out there that, masks are widespread. I think it's quite uncertain, unfortunately. And the same goes in the hospital. We have a lot of uncertainty there as well as to whether we should be wearing masks at all times.
I'm just checking if you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you. Debbie, we also actually have a question from Maryland asking about gloves.
So gloves I would advise against wearing. The reason why is what I was just alluding to before. You should be washing your hands. When you're wearing gloves, you tend to not wash your hands as much, and the virus can stay on the gloves. So your gloves are usually quite dirty. So your best bet is really to avoid gloves and just wash your hands a lot. Good old soap and water.
Yeah, protective equipment, if it's not used correctly, will give you a false sense of security and might actually lead you to engage in more risky behavior, thinking that you're safe, but you might actually infect yourself.
Exactly, and that's a good point for the masks.
I had a very interesting question about tanning beds, whether or not going to a tanning bed will kill the virus. No. UV can this virus, but not at the wavelengths that are used in a tanning bed. It is a very special wavelength, very short wavelength UV that is needed, and those are specialized lamps. They're not available yet. There's some very interesting research on those lamps, which could potentially be installed in airports and stores, because at that particular wavelength, 242 nanometers, is very, very specific. They don't harm human tissue, and they do destroy the virus. But no, going into a tanning bed, well, I'm sure Debbie will agree, is a bad idea in the first place, irrespective of the virus, but it is not going to solve the COVID problem.
But I will add that I do have a little tanning bed for my phone, which does do the trick. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, unfortunately, those are out of stock everywhere. These are little gizmos where you can put your phone in and you fold it in there, and there's the right wavelength of UV, and that will have the sterilizing effect. But I don't think you can get your hands on those right now. There's also the question.
Jonathan is showing it.
Of course, Jonathan has one.
Yes, and I'm not doing publicity for the company, but yes, this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
It uses UVC. You put your phone in there, you hit the button at the top, and then after 10 minutes, it's been sanitized.
So why would that be more effective, though, than just using a 70% or higher ethanol solution to clean your phone?
It's not more effective, but the solution could damage the touch screen on your phone.
in the long run, I mean, now the companies are saying, well, if you do it correctly and you don't get any liquid inside the phone, I mean, how can you be sure? So this by using UVC, at least you're not applying liquid to your phone.
I feel that this might be something where in our future, wherever this new normal ends up being, that I think this type of tanning bed for your phone, as opposed to the Lysol wipes, are going to be pretty much standard wherever we go, even restaurants, any of those types of things where all that contamination can happen.
Well, there are these UV wands that are becoming popular. And those do put out UVC, and they're configured in such a way that if you accidentally turn it towards you, it goes off because it can be quite dangerous to do that. So anyway, the idea there is to run these over a surface and sanitize it. The problem with this is the time that is needed, and it's quite significant. Although they advertise 5 seconds, I don't think that's the case. But I think we'll hear more about this because obviously it's a rather easy way to try to sanitize the surface.
Obviously, those devices are phone-shaped, but is there any reason you couldn't put other things in there? Shove your keys in to get sanitized, your lip balm, anything?
Yeah, you can actually use this to sanitize your keys, and I've done it, your credit cards as well. And there are larger versions of it that are used in labs also if you want to sanitize larger surfaces. I mean, these things are not cheap. I mean, most people will not be able to afford something like this. So it's not a technology that is readily available to most people, unlike wipes, which are kind of fairly affordable.
So we just have a question here that's kind of similar. So dialysis machines and complex equipment like ventilators in the hospital, are they being deep cleaned between patients?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
That's it. Moving on.
Okay. And then also
there's a very clear cleaning regimen done after a rule out COVID patient has been in the room. And on top of that, the rooms are generally negative pressure rooms to start with. So the air is circulated out of the room quite quickly. So yeah, I mean, hospitals are definitely taking excessive measures, and it's the healthcare workers are not just the doctors and the nurses. I mean, that's including the housekeeping staff and the RTs and the orderlies, and everybody is there working overtime.
For sure.
There, the air circulation, of course, is critical in the negative pressure rooms, and it's designed in such a way to take everything out of the air. But in other situations, like story of this bus in China, which is quite worrisome. And in China, apparently, they have video cameras on all the buses. They monitor everything. And there's this case, which it sounds reliable, where someone who was sneezing and coughing and was later confirmed to have COVID was sitting in the back of the bus. And there were, I think, about 8 or 10 people in the bus. There was nobody standing. They were all sitting. It was a long-distance bus. And 8 or 10 people sitting quite far from him came down with COVID. And the air conditioning in the bus was such that the air was circulating from the back to the front. And of course, this has to be confirmed. And, it's not a peer-reviewed thing, so, I don't want to jump on it too much. But it brings up the idea of what happens in sealed buildings, and many condos, for example, where you can't even open the window. It's all sealed. And, whether or not it's possible for aerosol to circulate from one apartment to the other. Nobody knows at this point, but you can't totally rule this out because, there certainly are condo buildings where there are unusual number of cases where people say that they've had no contact with each other.
Can we go back to Facebook? So we have two questions. One is from our good friend Terry Polivoy, and this is probably for Debbie, and this is quite sad and a reality of the situation we're in. How hard is it for security to handle large families who demand to attend to the ER with their loved ones?
I wouldn't know because they don't make it past security. There's no unfortunately it is very sad, and I'm definitely spending a lot more time on the phone speaking with my patients' families because they're not there. And that's definitely a challenge, and it's especially a challenge for the patients that are admitted on the ward. Think about all the palliative care patients also. It's very sad for them.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
There are two questions here that are linked. It's about washing fruits and vegetables, which I know, Joe, you addressed, with soap and water. Because one person says, I'm confused, we have to use soap and water to wash our hands, but we could only eat fruit and vegetables with water only. Why, especially if you have an employee, a store employee, packing your fruits and vegetables for you? Why wouldn't you use soap and water on those?
First of all, you do not want any soap residue in your gut. This is not a good thing. And so if someone persists in using soap, you have to make sure that you really rinse the stuff very well. But the studies have shown that just running water is enough to clean the surface of any virus. So you do not need the soap. But again, it's a question of really leaving it under the running water, not just putting it there and then taking it away.
But that doesn't go for our hands? But what about just running water on our hands?
No, because your hands are filled with all kinds of crevices and greasy material where the virus can hide. So for sure, and of course there's no problem there with residue of soap on your hands. It's not getting into your stomach as it might if you're not going to rinse off your fruits and vegetables.
Okay.
There are certain products that are meant specifically to wash fruits and vegetables that they're not soap products.
Yeah. They were designed for bacteria. So I don't know if I don't know if those have ever been tested against
viruses.
Again, we're back to masks here. Handmade masks.
Wait, just let me.
Oh, I'm sorry, you froze.
Hold on, just one more thing, which is I think important to point out. This is a respiratory virus. It has to get into your respiratory tract. Eating it is not the problem. So people are so concerned about traces of virus being on their food. It's not the issue. The issue is getting it into your nose, getting into your eyes. Now, it is true that food, of course, goes into our mouth. And all the advice is don't touch your mouth, don't touch your nose, don't touch your eyes. But when the virus is in the food, it goes straight down the esophagus. It goes into your stomach where the acid will inactivate it. So food is not the real issue. It's exposure to inhaled virus that's the problem. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we have a question on YouTube. I have friends and coworkers that lost their sense of smell and taste with no other symptoms. Does this mean that they have coronavirus, and are they now immune?
I think Jonathan looked at that. No.
Yeah, I did look at. I think Debbie wanted to chime in, but just very quickly, this loss of smell and sometimes loss of taste, it has been reported more and more by physicians who are treating patients with COVID. It is not a specific symptom. So if you have it, it doesn't mean that it's COVID. And if you don't have it, it doesn't mean that you don't have COVID. So it's important to remark that about a third of people who get a common cold or the flu or allergies will get a temporary loss of smell. So it's a fairly common symptom that arises in those types of respiratory infections and allergies. So it's important for physicians like Debbie to know that this can happen, but it is not a decisive symptom that tells you yes, you have it or no, you don't.
Debbie, have you noticed this in any patient?
So the patients that I've seen so far are not in the position to be telling me whether they have anosmia. Unfortunately. I'm smiling, but unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I agree with what Jonathan said. I mean, it's really not a specific symptom at all. And I mean, who hasn't had that with a cold? You get it's quite common.
The reason that that may be an interesting connection is because we know that if you have insufficient zinc in your body, that can interfere with sense of smell. And now there's all this talk about zinc supplements, to try to treat the virus. So there might be some bizarre connection there, because zinc and smell are connected.
But
Okay,
can't taking too many zinc supplements actually affect your sense of smell as well?
It can. And no one should ever be taking more than 80 milligrams of zinc a day. That really is tough. So, Emily, we have another question there?
Yeah, we have some good ones. This one is about PPE, so personal protective equipment. And he says, this is Gordon Yee, that the public does not know how to use PPE properly. How could you train them, as in the public, to use it properly? And I know this is also a big thing with face masks. I mean, it's one thing to wear it, but it's another thing to take it off properly and then what to do with it.
I mean, there's no reason for the public to be wearing PPE in the first place. I mean, these are specialized masks that we get fitted for. It takes about 20 minutes to get fitted for it properly. So there's a variety of different N95 masks depending on what the shape of your face is like. And so a trained technician will look at your face and try to assess which one is the best one to fit your face. And then you put it on, and then you actually put a big plastic bag essentially over your head, and then they spray a foul tasting substance in, and you have to do this multiple times where you're breathing in and out, and you have to ensure that you don't taste it, moving your head up and down, side to side. So this is not something, when I see people wearing N95 masks out in public, it's quite frustrating, because there is a real risk of running out of N95s in the hospital, and there's absolutely no reason for people to be wearing them out at the grocery store.
So maybe not. So we should maybe clarify. PPE is used to describe, protective gear that is worn by medical health professionals. But perhaps this writer, this audience member is asking also just about like a normal face mask where one were to go out. That also goes back to the question we had on Facebook about if someone were to make their own mask out of, whatever, cotton and sewing kit, which was the New York Times article that came out yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that a mask is good for protection against gross droplets. So if you're around somebody who's sick, who's spitting into your face, then it would be reasonable to put a mask on, or even a scarf or something like that, to act as a physical barrier. An N95 mask is protecting you against much smaller particles. And so when we talk about PPE, that includes an N95 mask, a visor, a shower, like basically a shower cap on the head to protect the hair, a full gown, and gloves. So that's what the difference is.
Okay.
Let me bring thing up, because with the spread of this virus, there's also the spread of misinformation, and we deal with this all the time. And I think this has to be pointed out, that there are a lot of people out there who really don't know what they're talking about and are giving out ridiculous information. And there was an interview today on CTV Ottawa with Bryce Wild, who has also been on the Dr. Oz show, which already says something about him. And his background is as a homeopath, but he was not even properly trained as a homeopath. It was some bizarre diploma mill where he was trained. Anyway, he was on there pontificating about boosting your killer cells, your natural killer cells. And the way to do this is to take echinacea and N-acetylcysteine. There's, of course, no evidence for this. There's some very minor evidence that echinacea may have some hope of reducing the severity of the common cold, but even that is highly questionable. And N-acetylcysteine, Debbie can talk about, because this is used to treat Tylenol or acetaminophen overdose. But Debbie, have you ever heard of N-acetylcysteine boosting natural killer cells?
No.
I mean, and there's all this information that is flooding the internet. And desperate people will do desperate things, and they will buy into this stuff. And we've had so many questions about vitamin C. No question that vitamin C is important in the functioning of the immune system. And then they're referring to some studies that are being done in China, saying that, look, serious researchers are doing this. This is true. The studies that are being done in China are being done with intravenous vitamin C, 12 grams a day, twice a day. And this is done in cases where they have lost basically all hope. It's an act of desperation. So this is not evidence that vitamin C is working. There is no evidence that vitamin C is effective against basically any kind of influenza, and certainly not against the coronavirus.
Let's go back to Facebook. We have a few comments about allergies. It's coming up to allergy season as we approach springtime, and will the histamine response that allergy sufferers experience have any impact on how the body might fight COVID? And also we have someone maybe expressing some nervousness about taking nasal decongestants. Nasal spray decongestants. Debbie, do you have any?
Well, I mean, I think seasonal allergy is, for me, there might be a bit of confusion. You know, if you start having a new runny nose, sore throat, or cough, sometimes it's not clear whether it's infectious or whether it's inflammatory from allergies. So that might just be a little bit more difficult to navigate. And whether it will make you, I think the second question was if you would be more immunosuppressed if you have allergies. Is that what it was?
It sounds like if the histamine response would kind of dampen your body's ability to fight off this virus.
I mean, I don't think so. Do you, Daddy? Do you?
I don't think.
I don't think so.
No. And I mean, the dampened immune response, and this I think could be significant that someone is taking steroids, or
Yeah. So that's a good point. That is, if you are on if your allergies are that bad, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So people who are on steroids, that would be an immunosuppressed group.
Now, Ada, I know that you've been looking into what happens with hair, whether or not people should worry about touching their hair.
Yeah, specifically I was inspired by some articles looking at whether or not you should shave your beard. And luckily, good news for everyone with a beard, it doesn't really seem to be the case. It's kind of, there's two different issues here, whether or not beards harbor bacteria. Like for some reason, bacteria and different microbes and viral particles are like attracted to facial hair. And that seems, from all the studies I've read, that's absolutely false. There's actually more bacteria on clean-shaven skin than on facial, like skin underneath the beard. But the other issue is whether or not people with beards shed more bacteria and viral and other microbial particles. And there does seem to be some evidence to that. In particular, I've been looking at some studies where they had doctors and surgeons put on face masks with clean-shaven versus with a beard, and the beard seems to rub the face mask and imitate different pathogenic molecules falling off. So there does seem to be something to shaving your beard if you're a doctor or a surgeon. And as we know, if you want an N95 respirator to fit properly, it needs to cover your entire face, which means it can't, in most cases, have facial hair unless it's contained within it. So like a little soul patch would be okay, but anything that crosses over the barrier of the respirator would get in the way of it. But if you're not a doctor or a nurse or somebody who needs a respirator to work for you, then you're probably okay to keep your quarantine beard, as I've started calling my boyfriends.
So Ada endorses soul patches. It's on the record now.
That's on the record.
So
now there's a question that came up about this email that is circulating, supposedly from Johns Hopkins. I don't think it's Johns Hopkins, and I tell you why. Because the first line says something about DNA being a protein. And no scientist, of course, would ever say anything like that. DNA is not a protein, it's a nucleic acid. But reading further down in that email, they also tell you about how to dilute bleach for disinfection. And they say to take 1 part bleach to 5 parts water. No, do not do that. That is way too concentrated. You'll be inhaling potentially dangerous amounts of foreign from that. The proper dilution, if you're going to use bleach, and we're talking about the commercial variety that you usually buy, which is 5 or 6%. In order to do the proper dilution of that, you want 4 teaspoons of bleach per liter of water. That is a very effective disinfectant, and that will not harm you. You don't have to worry about inhaling that. But the advice to dilute it 1 to 5 is incorrect. That email also talks about Listerine. And we're going to have an article about Listerine in our newsletter coming out Saturday. And if some of you are not familiar with our newsletter, you can go to our website, which is mcgill.ca/OSS, and sign up for it. We'll talk about Listerine. But this supposed Johns Hopkins email talks about Listerine as a potential useful substance for disinfection because it contains 65% alcohol. This is wrong. Listerine does not contain 65% alcohol. It contains 23% alcohol, which is not enough. So Listerine is a mouthwash. It is not a disinfectant.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we could go from the mouth to the other side of the body, a little bit lower. What are the
belly button?
Lower. Looking at the spread of virus through fecal or urine material.
That's a very good question. And there's emerging evidence that there is a fecal-oral connection. Study that was done in China in patients' rooms who were suffering from COVID and were symptomatic. They actually assayed the air, and they did not find much aerosol in the air, but they did find it in the toilet. And it probably is from flushing, and the flushing will aerosolize whatever is in the toilet bowl. And there is evidence that fecal matter can contain the virus. I mean, that's clear cut. So this is something we should be doing anyway. When you flush the toilet, make sure you put the lid down because there is aerosol coming out of that toilet. So I think we'll find out more about the fecal connection. But there seems to be increasing evidence that may be a way of transmission. Not flatted though. You can flatulate all you want because there you are just releasing a gas. And if you are releasing droplets, then you've got some kind of a problem.
But does it aerosolize?
Also, the fecal connection will be the title of Joe's next book.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, this is for Joe specifically, and it's interesting. You have endorsed elderberry extract for colds and flu. Any thoughts on that for COVID?
Okay, well, endorsement maybe is a bit strong. There is evidence that elderberry extract can reduce the severity of the cold. There is no evidence whatsoever that it will do anything for coronavirus, this particular coronavirus, but of course nobody has looked at it. But by everything that we see from how contagious this thing is, it's extremely unlikely that something like elderberry will have an effect. But at least it's a harmless. I mean, the same thing, vitamin C. I mean, taking the 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day is a harmless thing to do, and people are doing it. There's just no evidence for it, and no, there's no evidence for elderberry doing anything like this, or any other kind of dietary supplement. There's no special diet or dietary supplement that can tackle this virus.
Okay. Just back to the fecal transmission. There's someone, Allison makes a very good point here on Facebook that she says there are no lids on hospital toilets.
Is that true, Debbie?
I think so. Yeah, I think she's right.
All this might be, again, whatever new normal.
Public toilets, I think, generally tend to not have lids.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That might
There's a risk factor.
That might be something in the future that might end up changing because of all of this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Allison.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
I do have another question on someone who is self-isolating and quarantining at home from a snowbird, and all they're doing is going out for walks by themselves and not going anywhere and not seeing anyone. Do they still have to wash their hands and clean their surfaces, and why if it's just them?
Because they're not sure what they touched. If they took the elevator, touched the elevator button, touched the doorknob. I mean, it's always a good idea to wash your hands. You can never, in this instance, you can never wash your hands too often, right, Debbie?
Right. I told you they should be raw and rough. I don't want to see any nice
If you're
and
bleeding
silky
from your
hands.
hands, you are washing them too often.
Yeah.
I'm just really good at using hand cream.
They're saying that if you use a moisturizer, then that is going to attract the virus. I mean, it's so much
Crap.
just silliness out there. Yeah. Including injections of ozone. This is a question that was posed as well. There are, quote, therapists out there who are either injecting with a needle or intravenously ozone to kill the virus. I mean, this of course is nonsense. There's zero evidence for that. And also, what I find particularly interesting about this is that the people who will go for these kind of therapies are also the ones who will be swallowing truckloads of antioxidants. And they don't see the irony of infusing ozone into their bloodstream and then taking antioxidants. Because, of course, the way ozone works is by breaking down and generating oxygen in the system. Okay, any other questions out there?
Just talking about groceries. So why don't you, there's a few things here on groceries. Why don't you, each of you, kind of take us through your grocery routine? Are you even going out for groceries? Are you getting them delivered? Do you have a triage unit set up in your vestibule? Jonathan, what's your grocery routine like these days?
Yeah, the whole grocery question is very interesting. It's being asked a lot. I don't think that there is a definitive answer that will satisfy everyone. It's always a question of by how much do you want to reduce your risk? And as has been mentioned before, the idea that you're going to get this infection from boxes and produce you buy from the grocery store, I mean, it's highly unlikely. But we also know that these surfaces can be contaminated depending on who touched them, and the virus can stick around for a little while. So it always depends on how much of a risk you're willing to put up with. If you're immunocompromised, if you're older, maybe you want to be a bit more safe in that regard than other people. I'm maybe a little over the top, but I have it delivered. I leave it in the vestibule. I disinfect the boxes and everything with a wipe. And then I bring it inside. Again, I'm probably going a little overboard with this, but I just want to minimize my risk as much as possible. It doesn't take too much time, so that's what I do.
Got it. Ada, what about you?
Well, I have had to get friends and family to help give me groceries because the online systems are super backed up and I'm not allowed to leave the house.
Explain.
So
why aren't you allowed to leave the house?
Because I had corona and
Oh no, let's kick her off the stream. She's contagious.
Quarantine period. Strictly speaking, my quarantine period is done, but I have exposed my poor boyfriend to it and his quarantine period is not done. So I'm still in quarantine by proxy is what I'm calling it. But I've had some friends drop off some bags of groceries for me, and I do something very similar to Jonathan. Like I bring the bag just inside my front door, wipe everything down with bleach and a rag, the 4 teaspoons to 1 liter, and then put it all away and wash my clothes afterwards. Or not my clothes, my hands, rather.
So explain again, I know Joe can also comment on this, but you just said the measurement for the disinfectant?
4 teaspoons of bleach to 1 liter of water.
And we'll do the same as a Mr. Clean or something like that.
Yep, that is the CDC approved recipe to make a disinfectant that'll work on SARS-CoV-2.
Okay, perfect. Joe, what's your grocery routine?
Oh, I have a companion who does not allow me to go out of the house. And neither am I allowed to touch the groceries that she brings back because I'm not fastidious enough.
So how are you treating, or how is she treating them?
Yeah, well, she is washing I don't even look. I don't know, but she goes overboard. I think that transmission from surfaces is unlikely. It would have to have a significant viral load, and you would have to touch it, and then you'd have to touch your face without having washed your hands. So to me, it is quite okay to handle the groceries, wash your hands after you've handled them. I don't think that it needs to be wiped with bleach. And again, I emphasize over and over again, this is a respiratory virus. And if it gets on your food and you eat it, that is not the problem. The problem is inhaling it. So, in fact, when you are mucking about with the grocery, washing it all over the place, you might aerosolize some of the virus.
That's a very good point. Okay, Debbie, what's your grocery routine?
So I definitely don't go out for groceries. I kind of feel like I'm radioactive these days. So I definitely am not going in the grocery store. Generally, we're ordering groceries, and I'd say our routine is generally similar to Ada and Jonathan. We tend to wipe things down. I'm trying not to be too crazy about it. Because I think, you can really go overboard with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think someone made a good point on the Facebook stream. And I was going to say the same thing. Part of cleaning the groceries is just to keep ourselves sane. I mean, of course, it's a respiratory illness. We could ingest it. There's no issue there. But could you imagine if you did? I mean, so I think it's more just like how can I go from the shelf in the grocery store to my fridge without doing anything and just washing my hands? I mean, it's a nerve-wracking, in this time for me, there's no over-exaggeration because who cares? Let's over-exaggerate, It's peace of mind almost at this point. But it is possible, I guess, to go over.
There's all kinds of opinions about this kind of stuff. But one thing that there's no issue with is to stay away from people. No matter who you ask, what expert you ask, or non-experts, right? Always keep your distance. It's physical distancing. That is the key. That's the key. That's what you have to emphasize. And also, I think, train yourself not to touch your face often, because people do this. And, the studies have shown that normally you can touch your face 15 to 25 times an hour, even without realizing it. And so if you're constantly washing your hands and you concentrate on not touching your face, that is really the way to tackle this problem. And, of course, keep the physical distancing. And I think we should be using the term physical distancing, not social distancing, because you don't want to social distance from people. You want to keep contact with people. But physical distancing is what is important.
And if you want to train yourself to not touch your face, I would recommend putting glitter on your hands and then checking your face after an hour to see if there's glitter on it. That's a
Did
joke,
you try
by the way.
that, Jonathan?
No, I did not.
Can you try it?
Activities alone while in self-isolation, yeah.
Okay, we just have a couple minutes.
Yeah, I have two, but there are two good ones here, and then we'll wrap up. This is someone who said that a study out of the University of Manitoba, the preliminary results suggest some masks could be successfully decontaminated and reused up to 10 times using common sterilization techniques. Maybe Debbie or Joe want to comment on that.
Well, we are starting to consider the idea of reusing masks, which I think is what's scaring people in the hospital world. Because it's not that we're short yet, but I guess that there is a real possibility of shortage in the future. And so right now what we were doing as of 2 days ago, because things are definitely changing daily, was actually discarding our N95 mask properly. So again, when you take off a mask, I will just point this out for regular procedural masks, if you are deciding to wear them, you don't want to just rip it off. You really want to take it off carefully away from your face, so that you're not throwing it around and aerosolizing whatever particles might be on it. So we're taking the N95 mask off and actually putting it into a paper bag with our name and date on it. And those are going into a larger bag for potential reuse down the line.
There's a lot of research on this now on reusing masks. And I think there will be a solution here because, of course, heat does inactivate this virus. You don't want to do this in your home oven, though. So wait until the experts figure out exactly what the procedure is if you are intending to try to clean a mask. But anyway, let's I think we had an interesting time here, and I hope that our listeners and viewers also will do this again. But let me just finish off with one of our pet peeves, and I know that Jonathan and Debbie will share this, is the medical medium. This character who unfortunately has a big voice on the internet, and also because his books are on the New York Times bestseller list, and he communicates with the spirit world. He gives out medical advice from a spirit guide. And the advice usually is to drink celery juice. And this is what he is now saying is appropriate for inactivating this virus. This is total nonsense. And furthermore, he says, do not eat eggs. Do not eat eggs. You know why he says do not eat eggs? Because the virus loves eggs. Now, let me tell you, I mean, we're all laughing at this because we know where this idea comes from. Because when vaccines are made, some vaccines are made using eggs as the culture media. So I guess in that case, the virus does like eggs because it uses the living cell of the egg to multiply. But this has absolutely nothing to do with eating eggs. That is not going to have any effect on your viral load in your body. Furthermore, it's not going to have much of an effect on your cholesterol level either. So let's leave it there, having debunked the medical medium who has no business commenting on COVID or indeed on anything else.
We also just gave a nice comment on Facebook. All of you have done a darn good job of not touching your face. So we did go the 45 minutes without touching our face.
I just did.
Me too. I
definitely did a lot.
Yeah.
This is such a complex problem that sometimes you feel like you want to scratch your head right over it.
But we'll be back.
Okay.
All of this, I just want to say, any questions that we did not get to during our 46 minutes, this will be documented on our Facebook and on our YouTube. And we will take a look at the questions we didn't get to and make sure that we respond. And we will be doing this next week as well. Keep focused on our social media channels, and we will publicize when it probably will be Thursday, and it will probably be the same time, but time we'll have to see. So and
there's also there's a chance that this is recorded.
It will be on our YouTube, and we'll make sure that it's up there. And it will be in the newsletter for sure this Saturday morning. And if you don't get our newsletter, you could sign up on our website, mcgill.ca/OSS.
And of course, you can always email your questions. You can put questions on both the office Facebook page and my personal Facebook page. And we eventually get around to answering all your questions, usually within an hour. All right. Well, it's been nice chatting with you. And thanks to Debbie, Jonathan, Ada, and Emily for helping to put all of this together. See you next time.
Bye.